Hey everyone, I just spent the last few weeks reading through The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and it started off really well, but didn't really stick the landing. And since I'm done, I'd figured I'd put all the reviews into one handy dandy video, but since I don't like outright recycling content, I've added a review of the single Hitchhiker's short story and a review of the series overall at the end of the video. Reviews will be in the order the stories are collected in the Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I'm not going to bother with "and another thing" because it wasn't written by Adams. Sorry. Let's get to it. Hey everyone, I just read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and it was very funny. It even got a few laughs out of me, which is notoriously difficult. I don't find anything funny anymore. It's a book about a British man who finds himself on an intergalactic adventure after the Earth is destroyed to make room for an interstellar byway, and the handy-dandy guide his alien friend gives him to make sense of it all. The prose? The writing is fantastic. It's witty, it's funny, it's a joy to read. I'm disappointed with myself that I never got to it sooner. I love the ideas in this book. It seems so strange that they're in a science fiction comedy story, because a lot of them feel like they'd fit right into a cosmic horror story, like the world's destruction to make room for a space road. And the characters were great, especially Marvin the paranoid android, who was just awful in the best way. The cons? You can really tell this story started off as a radio drama because it reads the same way it feels to watch a lot of films based on stage plays, where the camera work is dull and it's just a lot of people standing around in one place. All the plot is in the dialogue, not much time is spent actually doing things, and overall not much even happens by the final page. This seems admittedly by design, but Arthur Dent is just a boring lead. It was hard to get invested in the story when its protagonist is just so average, at least until the end, and it doesn't have an ending, which isn't a huge problem, but it does feel incomplete in a lot of ways. Minor issues aside, this was a great read. I really enjoyed it. I'd easily give it a recommend to any fans of science fiction or comedy if you haven't already given it a go, and I'm giving The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy an S. Hey everyone, I just read The Restaurant at the End of the Universe by Douglas Adams, and it was a real step down in quality from the first Hitchhiker's book. What a disappointment. It's a book about a group of ragtag misfits, including the last two human beings in existence, travelling to the restaurant at the end of the universe, in the hope that it might hold the question to the answer for life, the universe, and everything. The prose? I loved the idea of the restaurant itself, how it exists at the very end of the universe in terms of time rather than space. It was really cool. The writing was still very witty and pretty funny, though not as much as the first book in my opinion. That said, Marvin talking down the robot tank was great. And I liked that the focus of the novel was spread a little more evenly between the leads, because Arthur is still just such a milquetoast bore of a protagonist. The cons? This felt like the filler arc of an anime. Even less stuff happens in this entry than in the first one. It was such a slog in terms of actual plot. I just wanted it to get on with things. Much like the first book, you can really tell this story started off as a radio drama because the vast majority of its content is in the dialogue. The prose itself is still good, especially the entries taken from the guide, but otherwise it just felt a little bit bare. And this book was just so bleak. Nothing goes right for anyone. The resolutions the plot does hand out are depressing, and it just sort of fizzles out by the final page. Yeah, this was a serious slump. It wasn't bad, but I just could not get into it like I could the first one. I really hope the third book picks up, because if this is how it's going to be right through to mostly Harmless, I'm going to have a really bad time. That said, it's still a classic of the genre, so if you enjoyed the first book, maybe give it a read. Perhaps you'll get more out of it than I did, and I'm giving The Restaurant at the End of the Universe a B. Hey everyone, I just read Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams, and it was fun. You can really tell it started life as a Doctor Who serial though. It's a book about Arthur Dent, who is dragged from his unidyllic life on a prehistoric Earth, along with his alien friend Ford Prefect, by old acquaintance Slarty Bartfast, in order to save the galaxy from the kill-crazy cricket men. The prose? The book tells a complete story, a first for this series, which I really enjoyed. It was nice not to be left hanging on half the plot threads again, and even better, the narrative is really well put together too. There were some great twists and turns along the way. I also really enjoyed the lighter tone of this story. It didn't feel nearly as bleak as the first two entries, and it was very refreshing. The characters definitely deserved a break, and the writing is still pretty fun, and more than that, it actually feels like a proper novel rather than a transcript of a radio drama with a few bits of prose thrown in between the dialogue. Wowbagger got a good laugh out of me. The cons. It doesn't really resolve any of the hanging plot threads from the previous two books. They are mentioned a couple of times, but they're never brought to a close, which is very frustrating. As someone who could not care about sport if I tried, the story's focus on cricket and the integration of the game into so many of its jokes just did nothing for me. The bit had definitely worn out its welcome by the final page. And even though the book does tell a complete story, not much actually happens in it. This is getting to be a recurring complaint I have with this series. I really wish more happened in these stories. It's definitely a little different from the first couple of books, but I still enjoyed it, and if you liked the previous entries, you'll probably like this one too. It's just a decent story, there's not really anything more I can say about it, and I'm giving life, the universe, and everything a B. Hey everyone, I just read So Long and Thanks for All the Fish by Douglas Adams, and it was mediocre. Sorry. It's a book about Arthur Dent who suddenly finds himself back on Earth, and his relationship with a woman named Fenchurch. The pros? Arthur Dent really comes into his own in this book. This is the first time he hasn't come off as insufferably boring to me, and his relationship with Fenchurch is sweet, I guess. I especially enjoyed Adams confronting the reader about Arthur's sex life. I didn't realise the phrase "this guy goes so far back. The book brought back a few minor gags from earlier books to turn them into major plot points here in a really interesting way. I thought it was really well done. And it does kind of resolve a few things left hanging from earlier books in its own weird way. I get the feeling I'm never going to get definitive conclusions to them, so at this point I'll take it. The cons? This book is missing Trillian, Zaphod, Marvin for the most part, and pretty much the entire galaxy. Almost the entire thing is set on Earth, and it's just not the same. This series is at its best when Adams is throwing crazy science fiction concepts at moments of British comedy, and there's just very little of that here. The book just hand-waves the fact that Earth exists again. There is an explanation, but it feels so unearned. It felt more like Adams wanted to write a slice of life book set on Earth than this is where the series really needed to go. And it just wasn't very funny, at least compared to the first three books. It's fine. It's not as good as the previous three though, so if you're not looking for a slice of life story with hitchhikers characters, I'd suggest you give this one a miss. And I'm giving So Long and Thanks for All the Fish a C. Hey everyone, I just read Mostly Harmless by Douglas Adams, and it was awful. Getting through this book was like pulling teeth. It's a book about Arthur Dent, who once again finds himself stranded somewhere in the galaxy, and the sudden appearance of the daughter he never knew existed. The pros? The writing can still be fun and witty when it isn't being so bitter. I especially enjoyed the thinly veiled jab at literary fiction, and the perfectly normal beasts. One part of the book I did actually like was the company that writes the Guide to the Galaxy getting bought out and turning it into something very dangerous. That was an interesting plot development, and I wish it had been given greater focus. And I liked that Trillian was brought back to be one of the lead characters, though her characterization throughout felt outside the norm. The cons? This book just undoes everything good that happened to the characters in the previous entry. Fenchurch just ceases to exist, Arthur is no longer back on Earth for some reason, the happy life Trillian was mentioned to have isn't actually happy at all. It just felt so spiteful toward the characters and the audience. On that note, this book is needlessly caustic. It is so bitter in every way. In its prose, in its plot, in its characters. It was just exhausting to read, and there was very little levity to lighten the mood. For example, Zaphod Beeblebrox is just nowhere to be seen. And the ending was just terrible. Given the kind of series this is, it could very easily be undone, but even so, as it's written, it was just so mean-spirited. This book is horrible. I don't understand why Adams wrote it when he did, because it is clear he was not in the right frame of mind to do so. It definitely brings the story to a close, but it is a far cry from the heights this series once reached, and I would only recommend it if you're a superfan or a completionist. It is not worth it on its own at all, and I'm giving Mostly Harmless an F. Hey everyone, I just read A Young Zaphod Plays It Safe, the one and only Hitchhiker's short story, and it was meh. What a surprise, I didn't like the short story. It's a short story about a young Zaphod Beeblebrox sent to recover a crashed spaceship. The pros? The writing's still good, it got a few laughs out of me. It's a pretty interesting concept for a story, and like with so many things in this series, it could very easily be switched around into a horror tale, and the ending twist was a lot of fun. It really gives you a sense of where Adams stood on that particular issue issue of the day. The cons. Despite this being a short story, it still felt like there was a little fat to trim around the edges. It felt like Adams was given a word count and had to drag things out a little to meet it. This story recycles a thing or two from early Hitchhiker's tales, such as people messing around with the past for present-day profit, which was very noticeable reading them all back to back, and I know I must be like a broken record with this complaint, but it just doesn't add anything to the series, aside from a bit of levity. It's not bad by any means, and I think it was written for a charity event, which was nice, but I didn't get anything out of it, and I'm giving young Zaphod Plays It Safe a C. And since we're here, one more for the road. Hey everyone, I just read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and it was pretty good, but after the first book, it's definitely not for me. It's a series about the misadventures of Arthur Dent, who is left as one of the last 2 humans in the universe, after Earth is destroyed by aliens, to make way for a hyperspace bypass. The pros? The writing is a lot of fun. It's witty, it's funny, it breaks a lot of established writing techniques without coming off as try-hard. Even at its worst, it is very well done. The series plays around with a lot of crazy science fiction concepts in the same way it plays with writing in and of itself, and it is a lot of fun. For example, the company that makes planets as its business, that's great. And the first book really is fantastic. If you read any of them, make it this one. The cons? Not much actually happens in a lot of these books, and they're already quite short, which makes reading just one feel like an incomplete experience. And because major plot points are dropped from book to book, overall the series feels like a meandering, incomplete mess. The series relies a lot on stopping the story dead in its tracks to go off on a tangent regarding one thing or another, and they're usually relevant or funny in some way, but I just don't enjoy that style of writing much. And the series really goes downhill after the 3rd book. The 4th isn't terrible, like I've already said, but the 5th and final book is so bad. It is such an insult to everything that came before it. You can really tell that Adams was burned out on the series by the end. Overall, I understand why this series is a classic, but it didn't really grab me beyond the 1st book, and by the final entry, I was more than ready for it to be over. I definitely recommend the first one, and 2 and 3 if it really grabs you, but beyond that, I think you can give it a miss, and I'm giving The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy a B. And there we go. Every Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy story reviewed, and here they are, all ranked. I'm glad I finally sat down to read these, but man did the last couple of books fall off. Anyway, I'm always looking for reading suggestions, so if there's something you'd like me to review, post it down in the comments. I promise I'll get to it eventually. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please like, subscribe, and share the video around. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye everyone.